As the countdown to the 2021 NFL Draft continues, so does the speculation as to which positions the Broncos will prioritize with their 9 total picks, including the 9th overall. Here to help me break down which players would make the most sense here in Denver at a couple of key positions, we have Cecil Lammey from 104.3 The Fan, James Palmer from the NFL Network, and for the first time, one of the best in the business, NFL draft expert and researcher for NFL.com, Chad Reuter. Chad, thank you so much for taking the time during this crazy busy draft season.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be just kind of tangential to the Denver Brain Trust, So this is great. I appreciate it.
Well, guys, this offseason through free agency, the Broncos have filled a number of voids at a number of key positions, especially on the defensive side of the ball. On the offense, quarterback and offensive line are 2 positions that some would say could use some extra depth. So let's start with the offensive line. Last season, we saw a rotation of guys at the right tackle position with Ja'Wuan James opting out of this season. So James, what's your gauge on the Ja'Wuan James situation for 2021 and how that could impact Denver's draft?
Well, first, Alexis, we all know this, right, guys? You can never have too many tackles. You can never have too many corners. And those are positions that you're always going to be looking at. But when you look at the Broncos offensive line, this might be the only real question mark. And it's a big one because after Ja'Wuan James opted out, I know talking to people in the building, there's some issues about him gelling back with that offensive line. There might be a little animosity between both sides. He looks like he's willing to work moving forward, Alexis, but he does have to earn some of this trust back from what I'm being told with that offensive line. And then again, after this year, and again, he's only played like 35 snaps in 2 seasons since they made him the highest paid right tackle in football when they signed him. There's no guaranteed money after this year. So going after a tackle to replace him moving forward doesn't seem like a crazy aspect at all, because if that right tackle gets locked up, this is a pretty good offensive line, potentially the best in the division.
Well, for those at home, if you're anything like me, you love a good mock draft. And Chad, you always put out some of my favorites. Most recently, you put out version 2 of your 4-round 2021 mock draft, which you have the Broncos taking offensive tackle Rashawn Slater, the Northwestern product. So why is Rashawn Slater the best fit for the Broncos over guys like Patrick Surtain, Mac Jones, and J.C. Horn, who you had going after the Broncos pick at 9?
Well, it's interesting. At that time, I thought they wouldn't have a shot at a guy like Justin Fields, for example, because of Carolina being in front of them and all that. So at that time, I'm thinking, okay, well, then what are they going to do next? They've spent a lot of money on a cornerback in free agency. So the next step is making that offensive line as good as you possibly can. Rashawn Slater could step in. Hey, if the James situation doesn't work out, fine, put him at right tackle. If he does come back, he can play anywhere in the line, center, guard, tackle, wherever you want him. He's that kind of player. And I don't want him to drop into the 12-13 area because he's too good for that. So sometimes a player goes where people don't expect. And I think that's a kind of a pick that could happen even if people don't really think it's going to. Patrick Surtain is a fine cornerback. He would be a great pick for them. Justin Fields could end up falling into their area now, so that'll be interesting. But if Slater's the pick, Bronco fans should be ecstatic.
Well, Chad just likes big guys who can dance because Slater could win. So you think you could dance?
What's the term,
for sure.
What's the term? What's the term Chad loves?
Any term you want. Any ballroom dancer, right? Is that the one we're going to use today? That's what Slater is. He's light on his feet. He's massive. His best spot in the NFL might actually be inside a guard, but you try him out at tackle. You've got that position versatility, something that's very important for the Denver Broncos. And the Mike Munchak factor. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. He does everything. He's a miracle worker on the offensive line. So you have that coupled with, I'll say Christian Darrisaw, another favorite of mine, another position versatile guy that you could take at tackle at 9. So I think Broncos fans should be thinking about these other options for Denver, even though I know that most of the time we're focused solely on quarterback.
Alexis, I'm the Debbie Downer of this show, right? So I'm going to poo-poo this idea just a little bit, because I do think Denver Broncos fans, and you read the post and it says there's no excitement to this team, and then you end up in the top 10 taking a guy that could potentially be playing guard for you, is not going to move the meter amongst the Bronco country faithful. I'm just saying that. Now, it's hard for some teams to sell taking a guy who's going to play guard for you in the top 10. Now, it worked out in Indianapolis, but that's one of the best guards we've ever seen. But at the same time, this is a very safe pick. There's some question marks around Penei Sewell, but there is a lot of safety around Slater.
Okay, you mentioned Penei Sewell. Another mockster, Daniel Jeremiah, he had Penei Sewell actually falling to the Broncos at 9 in his latest mock. Is there any realistic chance that happens?
I don't see it. I love DJ. All of us love DJ, right? He's one of the best in the game, too. I mean, there's no question there. But Penei Sewell, if you're the Bengals, who are the Bengals taking, right? And I understand people are trying to push, like Joe Burrow's trying to push for Jamar Chase. No, he's not. He needs to be protected. You've got to protect that asset.
His knee.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Penei Sewell to the Bengals makes a lot of sense, Chad.
Yeah, and I think this is the time of year where people mix things up just to kind of see what different scenarios can happen. If you look at past mock drafts and past years that are in early April, you'll see, for example, Tristan Wirfs was scheduled to go over Andrew Thomas. And of course, it was the opposite because a team likes a certain fit better than, nothing against the players. But things kind of get switched up this time of year. And I think that'll probably reverse back by the time the draft rolls around. Sewell will still be, in the mix at 5, for Cincinnati. And Slater will go a little bit later than that. So it's just a matter. But I'll just tell you that Slater, if you look at Slater, his workout numbers are very similar to Trent Williams, and his size is very similar to Trent Williams. Trent Williams went 4. So, it's going to be really interesting. And there are, you never know when they say scouts have questions about Sewell. Well, guess what? You could ask if you have an anonymous scout guy, he has questions about everybody, right? There's guys been doing this in the league for 30 years. Nobody can play. They don't want to put their name on anybody because then it makes them look bad if they don't get better. Sewell is fantastic. Slater is fantastic. So, I think this time of year, there's a lot to talk about. Sewell will go before Slater.
Okay.
The only thing I've heard, Alexis, honestly, about Sewell, and I think some guys might put their name on it, Chad, but there's some maturity stuff, and that's it. And really, that's about all you can look at. And if you're going to pair him in the group that's in Denver with Mike Munchak, I think the question mark you have for Sewell might be just eliminated pretty quickly, maybe by the second, third day of training camp. If you go with one of those top guys and the Broncos end up picking tackle at 9, everything goes back to the quarterback. And Drew Lock is your starter in 2021. Give me any sort of impact, Cecil, on this offensive line that wouldn't give you an extremely level-headed evaluation with everything that's around Drew Lock, with that offensive line, the skill guys. If you go O-line with that pick, you're going to get a very, very good, honest look at Drew Lock, whether he's going to be your quarterback after 2021.
That's what you're building for this year. If Drew Lock is your starter, no more excuses. This is it. Make or break for Drew Lock. And with the great offensive line and great weapons around him, now it's time to truly see in his second year with Pat Shurmur what Drew Lock can do.
All right, well, still to come on Broncos Beat, we'll discuss one defensive position that George Paton may prioritize on draft night, and it might not be the one that you're thinking of. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Broncos Beat. Alexis Perry here alongside Cecil Lammey, Chad Reuter, and James Palmer. Guys, a couple of months ago, the Broncos taking a cornerback with their 9th overall pick seemed like the only option for them. But thanks to a successful free agency and the signings of Ronald Darby and Kyle Fuller, the Broncos aren't pigeonholed into taking a corner in the top 10. Yes, it might still happen, but there's also a chance we could see them go inside linebacker given the depth of this class and the need for one of these new era inside linebackers. So Chad, really quick before we get into this class, what are some of the traits of this modern day inside linebacker?
Well, I think in my first 4-round mock draft, I had them taking Micah Parsons, and I think I had a conversation with Cecil about that. And I think what you have is you need the mobility as well as the toughness. So you got to be able to cover in space, as well as, shoot a gap. You have to be able to make plays behind the line of scrimmage before they get started, because these running backs will break off big chunks of yardage. So you have to be able to attack. And you saw it with Devin White with the Buccaneers last year. Now he's playing outside with Levante David, but he could easily, if they wouldn't have been able to re-sign David, he could have easily moved inside because he's got the strength, the quickness to shoot gaps, and the ability to cover in space. And a guy like Micah Parsons has that.
See, now with Alexander Johnson having a second-round tender placed on him, it seems like both he and Josie Jewell will be returning in 2021. So should the Broncos look to bolster this position in this year's draft? And if so, where could you see the Broncos actually drafting one?
Yeah, and I think 9 is that possibility. There are some second-round linebackers like a Chad Surratt that I've fallen in love with down at the Senior Bowl that I think the Broncos could be considering as well. But then inside linebacker is still a need because all due respect to Alexander Johnson and Josie Jewell, but they'd fit great in the 90s. This is in the 90s. And I'm not even going to look at the Broncos' own roster. I'm going to look at the rosters of the opponents within the division. And I see Travis Kelce. Hey, there's Jared Cook and Donald Parham. And of course, who I think is the best tight end in the league, Darren Waller with the Las Vegas Raiders. So you've got those type of tight ends. You've got to keep up with them. Hitting, tackling, these are all things that Vic Fangio covets. And obviously you need to have it inside linebacker. But the coverage ability is not there with Jewell. It's not there with Johnson. It's there with some of these guys like a Micah Parsons. I think Chad Surratt in the second round, I'm stuck on him as a great pick for the Broncos. So you have some options in upgrading that position.
Yeah, Cecil, there's a couple of options outside of Chad's. And his stock has been going up from people I've talked to over the last couple of weeks. And there are a couple of spots maybe that one of these, maybe 3 different guys you can maybe get second, maybe third round. I think you remember you're picking at the top of the second, so you do have that opportunity. But this brings me back to an argument me and Silver were having on NFL Network last week where it was like, hey, Todd Bowles gave the blueprint on how to stop Patrick Mahomes. And this is relevant because obviously it's within the division of the Broncos. Well, it's like, well, no, there's no blueprint. Yeah, maybe there's one, but you have to have the horses to go out there and stop Patrick Mahomes. And that's why you go and you look at Levante David and you go and look at Bush playing next to him. And if you don't have that talent, the ways to stop Kansas City aren't possible, but because you need the players that can go out and do it. And Cecil's right with covering the tight end position in this division. You need to upgrade the speed at that spot, number 1, Alexis, to be able to go out there and be able to play a little bit differently. But we were talking in the commercial break, Vic Fangio was very picky about what he likes at that middle linebacker spot.
Exactly. You guys, who are some of the guys that you could see the Broncos actually drafting as high as 9, or who are some of the names that we might not hear quite as much, but they might be good options later in later rounds?
Well, I think you've got Jabril Cox from LSU would be in that second round conversation. I think Chad Surratt's more of a third round, early third, because Denver's picking so early. I think that's more of a third round situation. It's interesting. Zach Vaughn from Wisconsin was put in a lot of first round mock drafts last year, but he slid to the third. So teams really have to have the right fit. They really got to like a guy who's a little bit thinner, athletic linebacker. They don't always go as early as people think. But so I think there's actually quite a few options. Pete Werner from Ohio State, another excellent third round potential pick for Denver. There's quite a few. And so if you're going to go, I can understand why people are, hey, Micah Parsons is a great player, but we can really get another guy that can fit that role a little bit later in the draft.
Well, and what do you want? And by the way, James, I want you to check your DMs because I asked you about Baron Browning. Let's talk about
right.
Let's talk about Zaven Collins. You didn't respond to that. Let's talk about Zaven Collins, right? If you want a pass rushing linebacker. And again, I think what Chad has highlighted and what James has highlighted as well is it's not really necessarily inside linebacker anymore. It's just linebacker. And Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, why haven't we talked about him yet? Is he a safety? Is a linebacker? Who knows? I know he's a playmaker. The Broncos need that at the linebacker position.
Okay, speaking of JOK really quick, because I talked to Steve Atwater last week, and he was passionate about JOK not being considered an inside linebacker. He was like, that man is a safety. Hypothetically, the guy's a safety. Why would that actually still make him a good fit for this Broncos team?
Well, you would still play him inside. I mean, he's a safety. And I could see why Atwater would want to say that because he's that kind of player. But a lot of, quote, inside linebackers are lining up over slot. I mean, it's just part of the game now. So he's a perfect fit in that. And he is, I mean, Brian Kelly even said after you're talking about JOK at his pro day, we decided he was better outside. I mean, he's, quote, an inside linebacker, but he's better outside, working the slot, working outside in coverage. So that's what he is, whether you call him a safety or linebacker or whatever you want to call him.
All right, well, while some hope the Broncos ride with Drew Lock this season, others feel like drafting a quarterback could cure the Broncos' offensive woes. So we'll discuss one guy who could possibly land in Denver on draft night coming up on the other side of the break. Well, it would not be Broncos Beat if we didn't talk quarterback. Am I right, fellas?
Oh, 100%.
Without further ado, Trey Lance. The North Dakota State product will be participating in a second pro day a week from today, joining Mac Jones and Justin Fields as the guys giving player personnel execs and scouts a chance to get another look. So, Cecil, just how rare are these second pro days? And do you think this is something Lance absolutely needs to do heading into the draft?
Well, first and foremost, this is very unusual for quarterbacks, especially, who were somewhat limited sometimes. You know, guys like, I remember when Matt Ryan came out, it's like, he's not going to participate at the Senior Bowl. Okay, that's fine. He's still going to be a top 5 pick. You'll throw at the combine, you'll have your pro day, and that'll be it. Well, with no scouting combine this year, with limited in-person workouts, you wonder, okay, how are these quarterbacks going to showcase their ability? I've got it. 2 pro days. And with a guy like Trey Lance, who I really, really enjoy his game. In fact, he reminds me, and hopefully Chad backs me up on this, of a more polished version of Dak Prescott. When Prescott came out of Mississippi State, you see similar skill with Trey Lance, but he played 1 game in 2020. It was his worst game of his college career. He threw his only interception of his college career. So you bet he needs that second pro day, especially with the 49ers moving up to 3. Everyone's saying it's for Mac Jones. I don't think so. I think it might be for Trey Lance. He goes out there and shows well at his second pro day. It could very well be for Trey Lance.
I think it's really interesting, this second pro day for Trey Lance, because when you look at when Justin Fields declared that he was going to have his second pro day, that's going to happen this week, a lot of people are going, okay, well, that's kind of him and Mac Jones were throwing on the same day, right? You know, you can only have 3 guys go to a pro day. Maybe he wanted the opportunity for some of the people that were at Bama to go see him, and that made sense throwing the same day. Trey Lance threw on a day when nobody else was really working out. Everybody had an opportunity to go and do that. And when I talked to Mac Jones after his second pro day, I was like, you know, he was the first guy to do it, and that was in the works all off season. He was like, it's because you can't have visits and you can only send 3 guys. So I wanted as many guys from teams to be able to see me throw as possible, but also they wanted to weasel in there that Mac is super competitive and will throw anyone with anyone anywhere. And that was kind of what they wanted to sell him on. But Chad, this is kind of interesting when Trey Lance had a pro day that we all could have watched. And then he goes and has another one this late in the process.
And Quincy Avery, who's his coach, is not, he's a smart guy. And he knows that he needs as many opportunities for his guy to show what he can do to NFL teams as possible, especially considering, as you guys just said, he had 1 game this last year and 1 year before that, and that's it. Mac had 2 shots. Fields is going to have 2 shots. You have to, if you want to be in that conversation for 3, and I think he is, and Cecil, I think you're exactly right about this. I don't doubt anybody that says that they've talked to people in the league that say Mac Jones is a Shanahan quarterback, etc. That makes all kinds of sense to me. But I don't know that the 49ers have made up their mind. And if you can just put that kernel of a doubt into their head, or just even confirm what they're already thinking, get Trey Lance in front of them one more time and say, look what you have to work with here. He's smart, he's athletic, he's competitive, he's strong. He could be Josh Allen. I mean, he's that kind of talent. And I think giving him a second chance is a great idea.
2 things really quick. I love, 1, when you say I'm exactly right, Chad. 2, I don't mean to be the guy.
Frequently, I have to say that sometimes.
I don't mean to be the guy that's grading pro days, but I am that guy that grades pro days. Lance had the best one of Mac Jones or Justin Fields. So now he gets to do it again.
Okay, if you guys were in George Payton's shoes, it's obviously seeming like Trey Lance is a guy that you'd have to move up for. So would you move up for a guy who really, in all likelihood, probably couldn't beat out Drew Lock in camp this year?
I think, Alexis, that's what makes going for Trey Lance very complicated for the Denver Broncos. It's because he is a guy, and we talk about San Francisco, that would have the ability to sit behind Jimmy Garoppolo. And obviously that is what Kyle Shanahan loves. He made Jimmy sit when he traded for him to make sure he understood everything. And that's the way he operates. If you're going to move up and trade for Trey Lance, how do you keep Drew Lock in camp? And then that puts you in a spot to where you have to play him right from the beginning. You do not have someone to groom him behind. In a roster right now, Cecil, I think if you look at it, would like to have somebody that doesn't have to go through a lot of growing pains over the next couple of years by the way that they evaluate where they stand right now.
Yeah, and it's not like when Dak Prescott came in and he was behind Tony Romo until Romo got hurt. Now Locke has had a propensity to get banged up. The Broncos need to be prepared for that if they move forward with Locke as their starter. But as much as I love Trey Lance, it'll be interesting if the Broncos were to make that move, Chad.
Well, I kind of look at it a different way. I've seen Russell Wilson go in and beat out Matt Flynn for the Seahawks job. You want competition at the quarterback spot. And you want the best guy operating your team. And like you said, Locke has been banged up. And he's also been prone to some decisions that aren't the best. If you have a guy like Trey Lance on the sideline waiting to come in, that might make Locke better. And the Packers brought in Jordan Love last year. Aaron Rodgers played better. There's no doubt about that. And so I think competition is actually a good thing. Whether it's at 9 or trading up, or getting a guy like Kellen Mond in the 3rd or 4th round from A&M, just to say, hey, let's see what this guy can do, and we'll see if he can push Drew to be his best, if nothing else.
Really quick before we go, Cecil, I just want to get your take on this. Lance is definitely a big project like we talked about, but the Broncos do have a true quarterback whisperer in Mike Shula. We saw the magic that he worked with Cam Newton. Lance sometimes has maybe been compared to Newton along with Dak Prescott. So do you think that Shula could get him NFL ready before this season opener?
Yeah, and ready a lot faster than some people think. Lance is highly intelligent. And the thing with Shula, I remember talking to Cam Newton when he was a second-year player. All he could do was talk about Shula and how much he loved him. So when you have that sort of true quarterback whisperer within your own building, and then you couple that with a high intelligence player like Trey Lance with his athleticism, with his competitive spirit, it could mean great things for the Broncos.
James doesn't like it.
From people I've talked to, obviously he does. North Dakota State prepares quarterbacks tremendously well. The teams, if you talk to them, they go, God, I love the way guys come out mentally out of that place. But with the just one pick that he threw, there are a ton of teams that go, well, why isn't his completion percentage higher? Like, what's up with the completion percentage numbers to where he's at? Teams just do believe he is going to take some time, whether you have a whisperer or not, but he does mentally get it quite well at the line of scrimmage.
All right, guys, that is all the time we have for this week's edition of Broncos Beat. Thank you so much for joining us. For Cecil Lammey, Chad Reuter, and James Palmer, I'm Alexis Perry. We'll see you same time, same place next Monday.